Catherine Kate Walsh was 18 years old when her stepmother Marie told her the house was no longer hers to live in. It was July 1947 in Billings, Montana, and Marie had inherited the house from Kate's father, Robert, who died 3 months earlier from a heart attack at age 52, leaving everything to his second wife rather than his adult daughter from his first marriage. Kate's mother had died when she was 12 from complications during childbirth, a stillborn baby brother who took their mother with him. Robert had raised Kate alone for 4 years before marrying Marie Henderson in 1943. Marie had been pleasant enough while Robert was alive, but his death revealed her true priorities. The house was hers now, and Kate was an inconvenient reminder of Robert's first marriage. On July 10th, Marie gave Kate 2 weeks to find other arrangements, offered her $50, less than generous but more than nothing, and suggested she find work and boarding in Billings or maybe move to one of the larger cities where single women could find better opportunities. Kate took the $50 and made a choice that would define her survival and prove that post-war surplus military equipment could become proper housing with ingenuity and hard work. The war had ended 2 years earlier. All across America, military bases were selling off equipment they no longer needed. Quonset huts, prefabricated semicircular metal structures originally designed as military barracks, were being sold as surplus for almost nothing. Most people saw them as temporary military buildings not suitable for permanent civilian housing. Kate had worked as a welder during the war at the shipyard in Portland, Oregon, had spent 2 years welding ship hulls, learning about metal and thermal properties and structural engineering. When the war ended, she'd returned to Montana and her father's house. Now she needed shelter, and she understood metal structures better than most people. She found a listing in the Billings Gazette classifieds: surplus Quonset hut, 20s 48 feet, rusted but structurally sound, must be moved, $5. The ad was from a ranch 30 miles outside Billings that had bought several Quonsets, planning to use them for equipment storage, but found they didn't need all of them. $5 for a metal building. It was rusted, needed to be disassembled and moved, and would require significant work to make livable, but it was shelter she could afford and could own outright. She drove out to the ranch in late July, found the Quonset sitting in a field, a 20-foot wide, 48-foot long semicircular tunnel of corrugated steel. The metal was rusty, showing orange-brown streaks where moisture had attacked the galvanized coating. But the structure was intact. The arch was still strong. The end walls were present. It just needed work. She paid the $5. Hired 3 men for 2 days at $3 each to help her unbolt and disassemble the structure. Quonsets were designed to be portable, the corrugated panels bolted together with simple connections. With 4 people working, they had it broken down into transportable panels in 2 days. She rented a flatbed truck for $5 and made 6 trips, hauling panels to a piece of land she'd found. 5 acres of marginal property, 4 miles from Billings that nobody wanted. Filed a squatter's claim, knowing she could formalize it later if she survived. Total cost so far? $23 for the hut, labor and transport. She had $27 remaining for everything else she'd need. Reassembling the Quonset took another week working alone. The panels were heavy, maybe 80 pounds each, but manageable for someone who'd spent 2 years handling steel ship plates. She'd position a panel, align the bolt holes, insert bolts, tighten them. Panel by panel, the semicircular structure rose on its new foundation. By mid-August, the Quonset was standing. A 20-foot wide, 48-foot long metal tunnel with 960 square feet of interior space. But it was uninhabitable. Metal buildings in Montana meant extreme temperature swings, blazing hot in summer sun, freezing cold in winter. Single-layer corrugated steel provided almost no insulation. The interior would match exterior temperature almost exactly. She needed insulation. couldn't afford conventional insulation materials. But she understood thermal principles from her welding work in ways most people didn't. She'd spent 2 years in Portland shipyards welding hull plates, and that work had taught her about heat transfer, metal conductivity, and thermal barriers. Metal was an excellent conductor. That's why welding worked. Apply heat at one point, and it spreads rapidly through the metal. But that same property made metal terrible for housing. In winter, interior heat would conduct straight through metal walls to the cold outside. In summer, exterior heat would conduct inside. Single-layer corrugated steel provided essentially zero insulation, maybe R0.5 at most. But dead airspace was different. Air molecules don't conduct heat well when they're trapped and can't circulate. That's why double-pane windows work. The dead air gap between panes provides insulation. That's why down jackets work. Trapped air between feathers. Same principle could work here. If she could create an interior shell positioned 6 inches away from the metal skin, the trapped air in that gap would act as insulator. 6 inches of dead air would provide maybe R3 to R3.5 insulation value. Not amazing, but infinitely better than bare metal. She scavenged materials with desperate efficiency and careful planning, found a partially collapsed barn on abandoned property 5 miles out, asked the current landowner, an elderly farmer named Joe Carson, who was selling his land and moving to his daughter's house in town, if she could salvage the lumber in exchange for clearing the debris. Joe agreed, probably thinking she couldn't possibly remove enough lumber to matter. But Kate spent 3 full days methodically pulling nails from every usable board, stacking them by size, loading them onto a borrowed trailer. She salvaged perhaps 800 board feet of rough-cut lumber, enough to build substantial interior framework. The construction process was methodical and technically demanding. She started at the Quonset base, building vertical studs every 4 feet around the entire circumference. Each stud was a 2x4 board, positioned 6 inches away from the metal skin, creating that critical air gap. She braced the studs to horizontal members at floor level and ceiling level, creating a complete secondary frame inside the metal shell. This wasn't simple carpentry. The Quonset's curved walls meant every measurement was different. She couldn't cut identical pieces. Each stud had to be custom fit to match the curve at that specific point. Her welding experience helped. She was accustomed to working with curved surfaces and precise measurements. The framework took 2 weeks working alone, measuring, cutting, fitting, nailing. Her hands were covered in splinters. Her back ached from the constant overhead work near the ceiling, but the frame rose steadily, a wooden skeleton inside the metal shell, maintaining that crucial 6-inch gap all around. For the interior surface, she initially considered various materials. Wood paneling would be ideal, but cost $15 to $20 for enough coverage. Money she didn't have. Burlap or canvas would work, but would sag and look terrible. She needed something rigid, cheap, and reasonably effective. She found the solution at a paper mill in Billings. The mill produced cardboard shipping boxes and occasionally damaged batches, boxes that got wet or crushed before sale. This damaged cardboard was worthless for shipping but structurally fine. The mill manager offered to sell her damaged sheets for 2 cents per square foot. Absurdly cheap. She bought 300 square feet of heavy corrugated cardboard for $6. The sheets were 4 feet by 8 feet, perfect size to fit between her studs. Heavy-duty cardboard, maybe 1/4 inch thick, with corrugated construction that added rigidity. Installing the cardboard required precision. She'd measure each section carefully, accounting for the curve. Cut the cardboard with a utility knife, position it between studs, nail it to the wooden frame with small finishing nails, carefully, because too much force would crush the cardboard. Section by section, the interior surface developed. The cardboard wasn't just draft blocking, it added insulation value too. Corrugated cardboard contains air pockets in its structure. Those air pockets provide maybe R1 insulation value per inch. Her quarter-inch cardboard added R0.25 or so. Not much, but every bit helped. By late September, the walls were complete. Standing inside, she saw cardboard-covered curved walls enclosing the 960 square feet. The space looked rough and improvised, but between the cardboard interior and the metal exterior was 6 inches of dead air that would keep her alive through Montana winter. The floor needed insulation too. The Quonset sat directly on graded earth. She couldn't afford a proper floor. Instead, she laid down a 6-inch layer of straw, cheap agricultural waste she got for $1 per bale. The straw created insulating layer between the earth and her living space, laid rough boards over the straw to create walking surface. By September, the Quonset was weather-tight and insulated, not comfortable, not pretty, but functional. The metal exterior, 6-inch air gap, cardboard interior lining, and straw floor created reasonable insulation. She'd turned a bare metal military building into something approaching livable housing for less than $40 total. For heating, she bought a small used wood stove for $12, the last of her $50 stake. The stove wasn't beautiful, but it worked. She installed it in the center of the space with a chimney pipe exiting through a carefully cut and sealed hole in the metal roof. She moved in September 15th. The Quonset was dark inside. The only windows were small openings she'd cut and covered with salvaged glass. But it was hers, owned outright. No rent, no landlord, no stepmother who could force her out. The reactions from Billings when people discovered where she was living ranged from mockery to concern. Living in a rusty military surplus Quonset hut insulated with cardboard and straw, that wasn't proper housing. That was poverty and desperation made visible. Helen Morrison, wife of the town's banker, organized a visit in October. 5 women from the Methodist Church came to convince Kate to accept proper work with proper lodging. They entered the Quonset and stopped, trying to process what they were seeing. The metal tunnel interior, the cardboard walls, the rough board floor over straw, the small wood stove. The whole space screamed temporary military construction adapted by desperation. "Catherine, dear," Helen said carefully, "this is a military building. A temporary structure meant for soldiers, not civilians. You've lined it with cardboard. Cardboard. That's not proper housing. When winter comes, and Montana winters are harsh, you'll freeze. Please accept the Harrison family's offer. They need household help. Room and board plus $15 monthly. The Quonset has insulation. The 6-inch air gap between the metal skin and interior lining provides R value. The cardboard blocks drafts. The straw floor prevents ground cold. It's engineered shelter adapted to available materials. It's a metal tunnel lined with cardboard. That's not engineering. That's desperation. You're 18 years old. You should accept help before Montana winter kills you in this thing." Kate had learned that people who'd already decided couldn't be convinced with words. She thanked them for their concern and watched them leave, certain she'd be dead by January. Through October and November, the Quonset proved more functional than anyone expected, and Kate developed routines that made unconventional housing not just survivable, but genuinely comfortable. The insulation system worked exactly as thermal physics predicted. Outside temperature dropped from September's pleasant 60s to October's 40s to November's 20s, but inside the Quonset, temperature remained remarkably stable. With no fire burning on a 30-degree October night, the interior would stabilize at 42 degrees. That represented 12 degrees of passive insulation, the dead air gap and cardboard lining preventing direct thermal transfer from the metal skin. The Quonset wasn't losing heat to the outside nearly as fast as bare metal would. When she burned a fire in the wood stove, the space responded quickly. The 960 square feet seemed like a lot of volume to heat, but the insulation system made it manageable. She'd build a fire around 6 a.m. using scrap wood she'd salvaged from demolished buildings. Within 45 minutes, interior temperature would rise from 45 degrees to 65 degrees, 20 degrees of warming with a modest fire. The heat distribution was surprisingly good. The Quonset's curved walls created natural air circulation patterns. Warm air would rise to the peak, then flow along the curved ceiling toward the ends, descend along the walls, and circulate back. The semicircular design that seemed like a disadvantage actually promoted better air movement than rectangular rooms. She'd maintain the morning fire for about 2 hours while she prepared for the day, eating breakfast, organizing her space, planning her tasks. Around 8 a.m., she'd let the fire die down to coals. The insulation system meant the heat didn't escape rapidly. By noon, interior temperature would drop slowly to 55 degrees. By 6 p.m., when she returned from work, maybe 50 degrees. Evening fire routine was similar. Build a fire around 7 p.m. Warm the space to 65 degrees. Maintain fire until 10 p.m. Sleep as temperature slowly dropped through the night, reaching 45 degrees by morning. The cycle repeated daily. Total wood consumption was remarkably modest. She burned perhaps 10 to 12 pieces of scrap wood daily, maybe 3 cubic feet of wood. At that rate, a standard cord of wood, 128 cubic feet, would last 40 days. 3 cords would handle the entire 5-month winter. Compare that to conventional houses burning 5 or 6 cords per winter, and the efficiency was evident. Part of the efficiency came from the insulation, but part came from the small thermal mass of the structure. Conventional houses had heavy plaster walls, furniture, carpets, all thermal mass that absorbed heat and had to be warmed. The Quonset had minimal thermal mass, just thin cardboard walls, a straw-covered dirt floor, and minimal furnishings. Heat went directly into warming the air, rather than being absorbed by heavy materials. She found work at a laundry service for $18 weekly, good wages for women's work in 1947, walked the 4 miles each way daily, which kept her physically fit and saved money. Spent maybe $4 weekly on food, beans, flour, potatoes, occasional meat when affordable. Burned scrap wood she gathered on weekends. Free fuel requiring only labor. That left $14 weekly to save. Extraordinary savings impossible if she'd been paying $7 weekly for boarding house lodging. Within 2 months, she'd saved more than $100. Within a year, she'd have enough to consider land purchase or business opportunities. The psychological adaptation to Quonset living was easier than expected. The space was dark during day. Only small windows at the ends provided natural light. But she was gone during daylight working. Evening darkness wasn't a problem. She'd light kerosene lamps, and the cardboard walls reflected light adequately. The curved walls felt unusual initially, but quickly became normal. The acoustics were strange. Sounds echoed slightly in the semicircular space, but not unpleasant. The sense of living inside a metal tube was present but not oppressive. She divided the 960 square feet into functional areas without walls. Sleeping area near one end with a salvaged bed frame. Kitchen area near the wood stove. Work living area in the middle with a table and chair. Storage at the far end. The open layout made the space feel larger than it was. The reactions from people in Billings evolved slowly from mockery to grudging respect. Initially, people called her Quonset the Tin Can, made jokes about the girl living in military surplus, predicted she'd freeze or give up before Christmas. But as October turned to November and she clearly wasn't freezing, wasn't suffering, wasn't asking for help, the mockery shifted to curiosity. How was she surviving? Was the insulation actually working? Could military surplus really be residential housing? December brought the cold that tested everything. Temperature dropped to -15 degrees and stayed there for a week. Kate's Quonset maintained livable conditions. She'd burn fires twice daily, morning and evening. The space would warm to 60 degrees quickly. Between fires, the temperature would drop slowly to 50 degrees. Uncomfortable, but survivable. The metal skin outside would be minus 15 degrees, but inside the Quonset, the 6-inch air gap and cardboard lining prevented that cold from penetrating. The insulation was working exactly as thermal principles predicted. Marie's house, conventional wood frame construction, couldn't maintain 55 degrees despite burning wood continuously. Marie was cold constantly, was spending more on firewood than she'd budgeted, was learning that conventional housing wasn't necessarily superior to unconventional designs. Then, January brought the blizzard that proved everything and transformed how Billings understood the relationship between structure design and winter survival. The storm hit January 12th with warning signs that veteran Montana residents recognized as potentially catastrophic. Morning temperature started at 15 degrees, cold but normal for January. By noon, 5 degrees. By 6 p.m., minus 10. By midnight, minus 20 degrees. The temperature drop was too rapid, too sustained. Wind built steadily through the evening, 20 miles per hour at 6 p.m., 40 by 9 p.m., sustained 60 miles per hour by midnight, with gusts reaching 80. The wind wasn't just fast. It was relentless, screaming continuously for days, creating wind chill that made minus 20 feel like minus 50. Snow began around 7 p.m., not gentle flakes but dense snow falling at 2 to 3 inches per hour. Visibility dropped to 0 by 9 p.m. The world became white chaos. You couldn't see your hand at arm's length, couldn't distinguish ground from sky. Everything was white noise and screaming wind. Kate was in her Quonset when the storm hit, had come home from work at 6 p.m., noticing the rapid temperature drop, built her evening fire, settled in as the wind began building. By 9 p.m. she understood this wasn't normal winter weather. This was potentially deadly conditions that could kill people in their own homes if heating systems failed. The Quonset's structural response to the storm was remarkable. The semicircular design proved aerodynamically superior to conventional rectangular buildings. Wind hit the curved metal surface and flowed over and around rather than creating pressure points. A rectangular building would have flat walls catching wind, creating stress on corners and joints. The Quonset's curve meant no flat surfaces for wind to push against. Snow couldn't accumulate on the curved roof. As soon as flakes landed, the wind swept them off or they slid down the curved surface. By morning, conventional rectangular roofs in Billings had 2 feet of snow weighing thousands of pounds. The Quonset roof was essentially clear, just a thin layer of ice where snow had melted from interior heat and refrozen. Inside, the insulation system performed exactly as designed. The metal skin outside was minus 20 degrees, frozen solid, covered in ice where moisture from the storm had frozen to the steel. But that cold wasn't penetrating to the interior. The 6-inch dead air gap was the critical barrier. Air trapped in that space couldn't circulate, couldn't transfer heat by convection. The cold metal outer surface couldn't directly conduct to the cardboard inner surface because there was no physical contact. Just 6 inches of still air. The insulation was passive but effective. Kate burned her normal heating pattern, morning fire around 6 a.m., evening fire around 7 p.m. Each fire lasted 2 to 3 hours. Between fires, the temperature would drop slowly, maybe 2 degrees per hour. Instead of the 5 or 6 degrees per hour, a poorly insulated space would lose. During the peak of the blizzard on January 13th, day 2, she maintained interior temperature between 52 and 62 degrees, depending on time relative to last fire. Outside was minus 25, with wind chill of minus 55. She was surviving comfortably with normal fuel consumption. The sound was remarkable. Outside, the wind screamed at sustained 60 miles per hour. But inside the Quonset, the sound was muffled. The metal skin transmitted some vibration, but the dead airspace damped the noise significantly. She could hear the storm, distant roar that made the structure feel like being inside a drum, but it wasn't overwhelming. Conventional houses in Billings were failing catastrophically by day 2. The Morrison house, well built by 1920 standards, couldn't maintain 50 degrees despite burning wood continuously in both the furnace and a supplemental stove. The thin walls of pre-war construction provided maybe R5 insulation at best. They were losing heat faster than they could generate it. Marie's house, where Kate had lived until July, was experiencing similar failure. The wood frame walls with plaster interior provided minimal insulation. Cold air infiltrated through gaps around windows and doors. The heating system couldn't keep up. By evening, January 13th, interior temperature was 48 degrees despite burning wood at unsustainable rates. The Thompson family's situation was desperate. Their house had dropped to 43 degrees. They'd burned through their entire January wood allocation in 2 days, had no more wood, were burning furniture, chairs, a table, wooden boxes to maintain any heat at all. Their children were showing early hypothermia symptoms despite being indoors. By day 3, January 14th, multiple families in Billings were in crisis. 3 houses had interior temperatures below 40 degrees. 5 families had depleted their winter wood supplies and were burning possessions. The volunteer fire brigade was trying to deliver emergency wood to the worst cases, but the blizzard made travel nearly impossible. On day 4, Helen Morrison's husband came looking for Kate. His house was failing. His wife was showing hypothermia symptoms. He'd heard rumors that the Walsh girl was somehow surviving in her metal Quonset. Didn't believe it, but had no other options. He arrived at the Quonset, knocked on the door, entered when Kate invited him in, and stopped completely, shocked by what he felt. Warm air. Not blazing hot, but noticeably warm, maybe 58 degrees. After 4 days in a house that couldn't stay above 45, despite maximum heating effort, 58 felt like salvation. "How?" he asked simply. "This is metal. Metal conducts cold. Your Quonset should be an icebox. How is it warm?" Kate showed him the insulation system, the 6-inch air gap between metal skin and interior wall, the cardboard lining blocking drafts, the straw floor preventing ground cold, the whole system working together to create thermal barrier. "Metal does conduct cold, but my metal skin is thermally isolated from my living space by 6 inches of dead air. That air gap is my insulation. The cold never reaches the interior because it can't bridge the gap. The cardboard isn't structural, it's just draft blocking. The real insulation is the air." But air doesn't insulate. Dead air does. Moving air transfers heat, but trapped air, air that can't circulate, provides excellent insulation. That's why down jackets work. Why double-pane windows work. Same principle here. 6 inches of trapped air between 2 surfaces. The Morrison family sheltered in Kate's Quonset for 2 days until the blizzard ended. 4 people in 960 square feet wasn't crowded. Everyone survived comfortably. The metal building everyone had called inadequate maintained better temperature than expensive conventional housing. When the storm ended, people in Billings couldn't deny what had happened. The surplus Quonset, bought for $5, had outperformed houses that cost thousands. The cardboard and straw insulation everyone mocked had functioned better than conventional materials. The transformation was immediate. By February, 3 families had asked Kate about buying surplus Quonsets. She'd explained the insulation principles, the importance of the air gap, how to retrofit military buildings for civilian use. At 18, she became the expert on surplus Quonset conversion. By spring 1948, 5 Quonset huts had been erected around Billings using Kate's insulation methods. Veterans returning from the war found them affordable compared to conventional housing. The buildings everyone had dismissed as temporary military structures became permanent homes through proper insulation. Kate lived in her Quonset for 12 years. Eventually married at age 23, a veteran who respected her engineering knowledge and understood the value of unconventional solutions. They built a larger house together, but kept the original Quonset as workshop and storage. She died in 2003 at age 74. Her obituary mentioned her wartime welding work, but focused primarily on the Quonset, the $5 surplus military building that proved metal structures could be residential with proper insulation. The Quonset still stands, preserved by the Montana Historical Society. Modern thermal analysis confirms the insulation value, R2 for the metal skin, R3.5 for the 6-inch dead air space, R1 for the cardboard, total R6.5. Not exceptional by modern standards, but adequate for Montana winter with efficient heating. The story is about a young woman thrown out at 18 who bought military surplus and applied engineering knowledge from wartime work, who proved that proper insulation matters more than conventional materials, who showed that metal buildings could be homes with intelligent retrofit. Because sometimes the person living in a Quonset hut knows more about thermal physics than people living in conventional houses. The cardboard walls everyone mocked were actually intelligent vapor barriers, and dead air space provides better insulation than most people understand.